So here we are in the middle of the phone trip to the Highland Telephone Company area. And before I finish this, I just want to go back to something that we sort of missed, which is that calling up to this area from the rest of the world, there has been a change. That's because Monroe, which used to be all step, now has a more modern number 1 EAX electronic switch. That electronic switch, which now handles the 782 office code, has become the long-distance tandem for this area. And when we called into this area before, that electronic switch didn't exist. We used to go through the Monroe Step. Here is a call to the Highland area that we heard in 1974 from my Lynbrook 3 crossbar 5 to Highland Mills. We're on White Plains 1, which is dialing 7 digits through the old Monroe Step, the 783. Now we've cut through, and we're already on Highland Mills, just waiting for the recording.
This is a recording from Highland Mills, New York. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording from Highland Mills, New York. Your call...
Okay, so that's the old way. White Plains dial pulses 7 digits through the Monroe Step. Here's the new way. This goes over N3 family carrier to White Plains Tandem 1, which then MFs to the Monroe number 1 EAX. You then hear that number 1 EAX kind of whine, while it is silently dial pulsing to Highland Mills.
This is a recording from Highland Mills, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Highland.
I love those N1 carrier trunks to White Plains 1 that I used to have. Actually, they are still there at this point, February 1977, but I'm not, because I now live on the west side of Manhattan. I have a number 5 crossbar line from the central office that is right across the street from me, but this office doesn't have N1 carrier to White Plains 1. Before we go back to the on-the-ground recordings in the Highland Telephone Company area, let me show you what my Manhattan West Side line has calling 914. We're going to hear from a Mount Vernon crossbar tandem for a moment, because my West Side line does have Mount Vernon Tandem 2, recording ID 91410, and it sends the relatively small Mount Vernon sector through it. Here, for example, is a call to Yonkers. So those are my direct Mount Vernon tandem trunks. It's T-carrier, so obviously I didn't celebrate those calls very much. Now when my Mount Vernon trunks are busy, it reroutes through Midtown Tandem,
21221,
which then has high-usage trunks to all of the Mount Vernon offices. Here's a call to an intercept number in Scarsdale. It's a number 5 crossbar that has pseudo-modern tones. This was done at a time when my Mount Vernon trunks were busy, so it rerouted through Midtown. You can tell because the crossbar tandem that we hear MFing is on a wire trunk. But it's using a really fuzzy T-carrier trunk to get to Scarsdale. Once the centralized intercept recording answers, you'll hear some hum and revertive pulsing in the background, indicating that that is a wire trunk from Scarsdale down to Yonkers, where the centralized intercept is. And it's fluttery as usual.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording.
Hey, the concentrator dumped us off. That was a mistake. Anyway, that's how the Mount Vernon sector goes through from my West Side line. First choice, Mount Vernon. Second choice, Midtown, which is actually two tandems working side by side, but they're both 21221 on the recordings. The rest of 914 takes the following route. First choice, White Plains Tandem 1. Let's dial a vacant code.
Number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 9144. We're sorry your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 9144. We're sorry your call cannot...
As you'll hear more clearly on other examples, my trunks to White Plains Tandem 1 are N3 family carrier, and it's a pretty noisy N3. Most of the time you don't hear White Plains outpulsing, sometimes you do. I wish it were N1 and I wish it weren't so noisy, but that's what I've got. Now when my White Plains trunks are busy, this is where it goes. We've gone over a wire trunk. This is the cue for the vacant code recording.
We're sorry your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 21224. We're sorry your call cannot...
That's Bronx Tandem 1 or 2. They both have the 21224 ID. As you can tell, New York Tel has a new standard voice as of 1977. I believe it comes from Autocron. And by the way, they really ought to educate the Autocron lady how to say that correctly. Hang on, I'll fix it.
Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 21224.
Much better. And those MFs were a customer's phone number. The customer is calling from a number 1 crossbar line. He or she dialed something in the long-distance network that Bronx intercepted. Bronx provides the CAMA function for the number 1 crossbars and panels in the Bronx, some in Manhattan, and also the number 1 crossbars in Westchester County. When one of those number 1 crossbars or panels dials something invalid, Bronx connects directly to the recording, and then the office sends the tones for the phone number of the calling subscriber. So that ends up spilling out onto the recording. That's why we heard that. That's somebody's phone number. Now the cue that you get put into before the recording starts is actually much more talkable than the recording itself. So if things are timed just right, so you're on there and somebody else hits the line at the same time, this is what it sounds like. Hello.
We're sorry your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 21224. We're sorry your call cannot be completed as dialed.
And by the way, the home area code for Bronx Tandem 1 is 914, even though it is physically located on Grand Concourse at around 175th Street, very much in New York City. But they don't need it to have a 212 home area because it's not used for 212. It's used for long distance. And there are 4 914 area number 1 crossbar offices, namely Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, and White Plains, that need the CAMA function done for them, and they need to be able to dial long-distance points in the 914 area on a 7-digit basis. So, for example, if someone in Mount Vernon wants to call Goshen, he just picks up his phone and dials 294 plus the last 4 digits, and then his crossbar 1 sends those 7 digits to Bronx Tandem. If Bronx Tandem weren't in home area 914, then they would have to prefix a 914 in front of the MF sequence. In number 1 crossbar, I've actually never seen that done. Anyway, I have access to Bronx Tandem, calling the 914 area, every time my White Plains trunks get busy. So if I call Goshen in the middle of the day, from my west side line it goes through Bronx, but not a Gamma trunk, which is nice because on these non-Gamma trunks you can hear the MFs. Here's a call to Goshen from my west side line via Bronx.
21224.
Nah, don't say it that way.
21224.
Which MFs to the new Monroe number 1 EAX tandem, and then that silently dials to the Goshen step. You know, the N carrier between Bronx and Monroe is so whiny. I mean, listen to that. My point is, it drowned out the sound of the number 1 EAX. Oh, they answered. Here's a call to Goshen, this time to the vacant level, when my White Plains trunks were available. Unfortunately, my White Plains trunks are N3 carrier that is also very noisy, although it doesn't have that awful whine.
The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Goshen, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Goshen, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Goshen, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
What the heck is that? It sounds like some switchman has a butt set tapped into the intercept trunk. And the butt set is picking up the sound of an alarm that's going dink, dink, dink. There's some sort of very noisy clattering going on in the background. And then the Goshen recording in its usual way is clanging in addition to the alarm, in addition to the clattering noise.
The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Goshen.
The reason I wanted to include these long-distance calls to the Highland Telephone Company, i.e. the Monroe Sector, is because they are the only points in 914 that go through a number 1 EAX, which always does this while it's outpulsing. Sadly, that easy-to-hear example that I just played is from Fulton, New York's number 1 EAX, not Monroe's, which is actually hard to hear in these examples because the N3 family carrier, both from Bronx to Monroe and from my number 5 crossbar to White Plains, they're so noisy you can barely hear it. So I'm just going to pick a few good examples. I won't include them all because they're just not that easy to hear. But here are some highlights. Here's a call to a ringing number in Goshen during a time when the trunks to White Plains were busy, so it goes through Bronx. Bronx MF's 7 digits to the Monroe number 1 EAX, which you can hear making that characteristic whine right after Bronx finishes MFing. For a moment there, you could hear the quietness of the N3 family carrier when it's off hook. On hook, off hook, with a hummy phone line. Now here's a call to a vacant level in 427 Maybrook via the Bronx route.
This is a recording from Maybrook, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Maybrook, New York. The number you have dialed.
Here's a call to a test number in Chester 469 via the White Plains route. This time, White Plains Tandem 1 doesn't let you hear the MFs. You call that a 1 kilohertz tone? Independence, what can I say? Nah, I'm just kidding, I love them. Here's a call to Chester via Bronx. By the way, did you hear the way my dial tone came on? There was an extra sort of relay sound there. Here it is. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can remove the dial tone digitally. There it is. I don't think I've noticed that before with all those calls from my West Side line. I think that's the first time I've noticed that. Here's another quick call to Chester via the Bronx route. Not sure why I hung up so fast, but there it is. Now here's a really nice example of a call to Washingtonville, 496. It goes through White Plains Tandem 1 on a trunk that lets you hear the outpulsing, and it gongs along with the MFs. You can also hear the whining of the EAX in Monroe very clearly. That made an odd noise and then went silent. Well, it was 2299, maybe it's a test line. Sometimes it gets so busy that my White Plains 1 trunks are busy, so it goes to Bronx, and then Bronx doesn't have a trunk to Monroe. So Bronx uses White Plains 2.
9141.
Here's a call to Washingtonville via Bronx, White Plains 2, Monroe.
This is a recording from Washingtonville, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Washingtonville, New York.
Here's how that goes through. Bronx, White Plains 2, Monroe EAX, Washingtonville.
This is a recording from Washingtonville, New York.
Here's a code that for some reason goes from Bronx to White Plains Tandem 4, and the trunks from Bronx to White Plains 4 are very clearly T-carrier. They're really fuzzy.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 91411. Your call.
Here's a call to an intercept number in the 782 office code. That's right in the number 1 EAX, and this goes through the White Plains Tandem 1 route.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording. I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording.
That's a recording we didn't get while we were on the ground there, and it's because I had not realized that 782 was no longer in the same step as 783. Here's 783 via the White Plains Tandem 1 route.
Sorry, the number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Monroe, New York. I'm sorry, the number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Monroe, New York. I'm sorry, the number you have reached is not in service.
And before we leave my West Side Crossbar 5 line, let's get that reorder tone from the White Plains 1 Crossbar Tandem. By the way, the reorder tone in White Plains Tandem 1 always starts with a whole reorder tone. It never dumps in the middle of a tone. So you always hear something like this, rather than this. They've actually got the relays in there to do that. I don't know why. So now here is the next on-the-ground stop in Upper 914, Chester 469, still within the Highland Telephone Company. Here is dialing my own number. we dial our own office code 469, nothing happens, and then the director repeats the last 4 digits as we dial them. Next, a call to Goshen. When we call the Goshen code 294, the director dials 6 and then does a mystery event.
This is a recording from Goshen, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from Goshen, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator.
Next, a call to 427 Maybrook. This office sends Maybrook via the Monroe Step. So when we dial 427, it dials 8 for Monroe, then 9 for Maybrook via Monroe. After that, there's a mystery event.
If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording from New York.
That's unusual. My long flash, instead of resetting the trunk to the other office, seems to have reset one of the local selectors here. I can now flash 4 digits and get a Chester number ringing. I dialed 928, Highland Mills. The director dialed 8 for the Monroe Step and then 5 to get Highland Mills via Monroe. And since I'm not dialing anything else, there, the director timed out and we can hear the Monroe to Highland Mills rather distinctive carrier noise. And by the way, after the director dialed the 5, there was a mystery event. At the end of this, I'll explain what I think the mystery event is. Now I can flash a number. It's funny, every time we call Highland Mills with its odd carrier noise and high-pitched ring, I feel like we're in a very exotic independent area like, well, Harrisonburg, Virginia especially. What happens here seems a little odd. We do a long flash on the dial tone, and even without a coin in, it somehow manages to get us to a local reorder. Normally, semi-dial tone first would not allow that to happen. There's not enough info on the tape to explain why it did here. Next, an attempted toll call. this area, the director plays no part in restricting coin phones from long distance. Instead, they just set up the coin switching train so that there are no toll trunks. So you heard it fruitlessly dialing the entire number over a reorder tone that it had gotten fairly early on. Next, here's a call to the Monroe Step. The director dials 8 for Monroe, 3 for the Monroe office code 783. I dialed 782, it dialed 8 for the Monroe Step, and now 2 to reach the 782 EAX. That's one more digit, but now I'm going to sit here. Our director will time out, and then the EAX will time out. There's that EAX noise. This time I'm dialing an invalid local code. It's going to wait until I've given up on dialing and then finally put me on intercept. Which happens to be busy this time, so we got the reorder instead. I dialed 000 and then flashed a few times, and once again it's going to wait until I've given up before putting me on intercept.
This is a recording from Chester, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording. This is a recording from Chester, New York. The number you have dialed is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. This is a recording.
Even if you can't decode touchtones, you probably know what I just dialed. 496 Washingtonville plus 26. Well, that proves one thing. The Washingtonville 2 selector, which has this test line and some outgoing trunks to other offices, can be reached from here by dialing 4962. Hopefully I'll use this to get through to a third office via Washingtonville. Believe it or not, there's actually no good reason why this reorder happened. I'll try again to get a dial tone. "49628. What are you doing, man? That's a vacant level in Washingtonville. You got other offices on 29 on... Oh, geez. I tried the wrong level. "469, the local office code dialed from here, does nothing. So let's dial 4690 and talk to the operator through the director."
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Sir, go to another phone. I can't hear.
Finally, here is, I think, an intra-office call. The reason I say I think is because the ring sounds a little different from the other two instances where we got the local Chester ring. That's the end of the tape. So, are you ready for a change? We've had 3 stops on the ground with 102 Director's Step, and now, how about a Stromberg-Carlson PL1? At this time, Ben and I weren't sure what the new Warwick switch was. We just know we enjoyed using it in combination with its TSD. But we found we were close enough that we could easily drive over to Warwick and find out. So, the next stop is Warwick, New York, where we'll see just what this Stromberg PL1 turns out to be. That's next. Now, before I go, I'm going to have to take many minutes to explain something. The mystery event. Starting in Washingtonville, we began hearing a sound that the director was making immediately after dialing the necessary digits to reach an outgoing trunk group, but not in all cases. An example of that from this most recent stop is here, when we dial 928, the code for Highland Mills. When I dial 928, the director will dial an 8 for Monroe, a 5 for Highland Mills via Monroe, and then it'll do one more thing that seems like a digit almost. That's 8, 5, mystery event. Thanks to having a sound editor, I've been able to look at this event very carefully, and I can observe some interesting things about it. Once you get past the extraneous noises that the director system makes, such as the background pulsing and the tick at the beginning and the end of the period where the background pulsing comes on, the event itself consists of 2 loud clicks. That's the event. In context, it sounds like this. These clicks exhibit a certain DC polarity. The polarity can't be observed on the Chester tape, but on the Washingtonville tape, and I think the Monroe tape, it can. Now, from the Washingtonville tape, here is a digit 1 followed by a mystery event. Now here's the same thing with the extraneous stuff cut out. Now, if you have a sound editor and you're looking at the high-quality non-MP3 version of this, you could actually stop it and take a look at those two events. The first one is the digit 1. The second one is the mystery event. Now, on the Washingtonville tape, the clicks of those two events are exhibiting a noticeable DC bias. That will come through on a short phone line. So you can actually tell a little bit of what's going on DC-wise by looking at the sound recording. Now, the digit 1, of course, is an on hook to the trunk followed by an off hook very quickly, and you can see the polarity if you look at it in a sound editor. The mystery event, however, looks like a digit 1, except the polarities are reversed. It looks first like it's going off hook. The trouble is, at that moment, it is already off hook on the outgoing trunk, so how can it go more off hook? The second click looks like an on hook click, but it couldn't really be going on hook on the trunk, otherwise it would disconnect, and it doesn't. So again, the mystery event is two loud clicks. The first one, polarity-wise, looks like it's going off hook while it's already off hook. The second one looks like it's going on hook, but it isn't. So what's going on here that would produce these two DC spikes? The first one in the off-hook polarity, the second in the on-hook polarity, except that's not what's happening. Well, you know, I've got a very good theory as to what this might be. And to explain this, I'll read something from Basic Telephone Switching Systems, 2nd edition, by David Talley. He's talking about how dial pulses are conveyed between one step-by-step office and another. This is from page 41. In step-by-step switching systems, the subscriber dial pulses directly control the operation of the selector switches. It is possible, therefore, that the resistance of trunk conductors between a number of central offices may be too high for satisfactory loop pulsing. The battery ground pulsing technique is often used when this occurs. This pulsing method, which requires no additional equipment, supplies battery and ground at the originating office of opposite polarity to the battery and ground furnished over the trunk loop from the equipment in the terminating office. By placing the battery supplies of the two central offices in series, this battery and ground polarity system nearly doubles the current flow over the trunk loop and assures satisfactory operation of the selectors in the terminating office. Once the trunk loop pulsing has been completed, the battery and ground from the originating office are disconnected from the trunk. He then talks about how the relays manage to temporarily, during the pulsing part of the call, modify the way power is connected to the trunk just for the benefit of the dial pulsing, and then when pulsing is over, it puts it back to normal. The idea being to increase the current on the trunk during the dialing process, but have it normal during the rest of the call. It takes relays, of course, to do this, and in the Bell system, it appears this is being done by an extra set of relays that kick in at the beginning of each dial pulse digit and then click back to normal at the end of each dial pulse digit. This is most noticeable from number 1 step regular phone lines calling crossbar 5s and ESSs. Here from Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm going to call a crossbar 5 that goes out on T-carrier. On a T-carrier trunk like this, the dial pulses only have to go as far as the trunk interface circuit in my local CO. So nothing special has to be done to bump up the current. So when I dial each digit, there are no extra clicks after each digit. It's pretty straightforward. Likewise, when you're calling a crossbar 5 in the same building, the trunk is wire, but it's so short that there's no need for extra current. So as we dial the last 5 digits here, there won't be any extra clicks. Now, by contrast, look what happens when we call a number 5 crossbar that we go out to on a long wire trunk. And this has the typical Bell System long wire trunk sound. Now, as I dial the last 4 digits here, there will be a loud "k" at the end of each digit. So you'll hear the actual dial pulses of the digit, and then the trunk goes "k." That last loud noise has to do with the so-called battery ground pulsing technique. This is the Bell System's way of doing it. Relays in the originating office effectively double the current on the trunk, starting with the first pulse of the digit, and then after the last pulse you hear that loud bump of it returning to normal. So that's the way the Bell System does it, but of course there would be other ways to do it. Now, the relays that do that in a Bell System step have to be there on the trunk all the time, even when you're not dialing. But if there were a way to centralize that function and put it into the register senders, that would save relays. The outgoing trunks would not have to have the circuit to change the trunk conditions during the dial pulse. What could happen instead is the register sender could make the change, and then dial the digits, and then when it drops, return things to normal. That's what I think the mystery event is. It's, I think, an attempt to use the battery ground pulsing technique for pulsing over wire trunks, but centralize that function of bumping up the current into the register senders where it's needed. That way you don't have to put it on every outgoing trunk. So in the event in question, the first tick would be adding a current source to the trunk. That looks like going off hook when you analyze the tick, but it's already off hook. The second tick that quickly follows is disconnecting whatever had been holding the circuit before. By adding the new current source, then disconnecting the old circuit, there is a continuous off-hook condition maintained on the trunk, so it doesn't flash because it would dial a 1 or whatever. So they first put on the new circuit with higher current, then take the old one off. That's what the double tick is, in my theory. Now, I wish I could say that surveying these 3 tapes from the Highland Telephone Company, you always get a mystery event on an outgoing wire trunk, and you don't on an outgoing carrier trunk. But I can't say that. There are several outgoing T-carrier trunk groups that do have the mystery event. But that doesn't mean it isn't what I'm saying, because T-carrier used to be wire. This is a very subtle thing, and it's quite possible that when they originally put in the register senders, probably in the late 60s, there weren't a lot of T-carrier trunks, and all the wire trunk groups were designed so that after the register sender selected the trunk by dialing the code, it would do that funny event to change the current conditions on the trunk. Those conditions would remain for the dialing of the last several digits, and then as soon as the register sender dropped, things would go back to normal. When they replaced the wire trunks with T-carrier, that subtle feature in the register senders never got changed, and it works anyway. They're using extra current to dial into the trunk circuit of the T-carrier, and it's more current than you need, but it works. That is what I think the mystery event is. It's a cool idea. There's really no reason not to put that in the AE director system, and so I think they did. It's just that after T-carrier replaced some of the original wire trunks, it ended up still doing that on trunks that didn't need it, but since it works, they don't fix it. Anyway, that's my theory as to what it is. Next stop, the new Warwick switch, as heard from a payphone in Warwick.